before we get started, I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we gather today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now we at the Perth Mint also acknowledge the Aboriginal peoples of Australia in a few different ways, one of them being that we fly the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags outside the front of the gatehouse here, and another one being this mosaic right in front of us. Now this was designed and installed in 2022 by a local Aboriginal artist called Kevin Binder, and it's named Pretty Country. So that bottom half there shows the gold rush in WA in the 1890s. The top half symbolises all of the different precious metals that we work with today. A bit of housekeeping for you as well. You will find toilets to the right hand side of the gatehouse, just next to the little green sign. Inside the building, next to the gift shop area where they are accessible and have baby changing facilities. And we do also have toilets in the museum where they're just up the stairs and to the right. And finally, I have just a couple of rules for everyone to follow today. The first one being no smoking or vaping on the premises. The second one being no running. Now firstly, that is for your own safety, that we don't want anyone tripping over and getting injured today. And secondly, is that if any of our lovely security guards catch you running towards the exits, they will think that you've stolen something a little bit shiny and golden today, and they won't hesitate to tackle first and ask questions later. Now, of course, you don't actually have to worry about that at all. If you are in need of medical assistance or you just need me to pick up a security guard off your back, we are trained to deal with those situations. So again, if you need any help whatsoever, do not hesitate to come to me. Finally, when we head into the melt house for your gold pour demonstration, if there's anyone here that has a pacemaker or any metal implants, we just ask that you sit from the second row and behind, as the furnace that we use operates with electromagnetic fields around it, and we don't want that to interfere with your comfort as well. But with that, well, why do we have a mint here in Perth? Well, it actually starts with the two gentlemen in the statue to my right, and their names are Arthur Bailey and William Ford. Now in 1892, they travelled over 600 kilometres east of Perth to a small place called Fly Flat, near modern day Coolgardie. And they camped there for the night on a dry riverbed when a sudden flash flood came through, washing away all of their camping gear and their gold prospecting equipment. No, naturally, they were devastated, but what they would find the next morning would go far beyond their wildest dreams, because that flood had washed away the entire top layer of soil surrounding them, leaving behind little gold nuggets everywhere. In fact, in their short stay at Fly Flat, those two found about 17 kilos worth of gold, pretty much just lying at their feet. Now obviously quite happy with what they discovered, they quickly gathered all of that gold that they could see and then headed to the nearest bank, where those bank tellers were a little bit suspicious of the two of them, because at that point in time no one in WA had found that amount of gold before. So naturally there were a few questions like, where did you find it, who did you find it with, and most importantly, is there any more there? Now of course, not wanting to create any further hassle, Bailey and Ford gave up the location of where they found their gold. Now unfortunately for those two, there was no privacy policy back in those days, and so those bank tellers took that information and told their friends and family, who then told their friends and family, then told their friends and family, and so on until the news went worldwide. So big papers from around the globe had headlines saying, "Western Australia's beaches are made of gold." So people came in their thousands. They jumped off the boat and started panning for gold right on Cottesloe Beach, where naturally they found absolutely nothing. There is, of course, no gold on Perth's beaches, I can certainly say that for sure. But once that crowd had realised their mistake, they all then headed over east, inland towards Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie in search of a big find. And from then on, we like to say that the gold rush in WA had truly begun. So John Forrest, who was our Premier of that time period, noticed the sheer amount of gold that was coming from the region and wrote a letter to the British government petitioning that we have a mint built here in Perth. As at that time, there were only two mints in Australia, so one in Sydney and one in Melbourne, and it was just starting to become too expensive and dangerous for us to keep sending all of the gold to the eastern states. And thankfully, after the government saw that amount of gold we were digging up, they quickly agreed. So construction started on this building in 1896. We first opened our doors in June of 1899. Now, when we initially operated, we were a branch of the British Royal Mint. So that meant that all of the gold found in WA was brought to us and we melted it down into gold sovereign coins, as it was the currency of that time period. So those sovereigns would then be distributed throughout the British Empire, and we continued making those until 1931. By then they'd stopped the gold standard, so we then moved into making pennies and shillings. Now by 1970, there had been a brand new branch of the Royal Mint built over in Canberra. Some of you may have heard of that one. They were to be in charge of making the circulating currency of Australia, so we were sold to the WA government, who we are still owned by to this day. Now from there, we've then pivoted to become what we are today, which is a specialist precious metals mint. So that means we work with gold, silver, platinum, and sometimes even palladium. So all of those metals can come to us and we can melt them down into coins, bars, jewellery and medallions. And since 1987, when we started our precious metals program, we've made over 61 million gold coins. And in our vaults, we hold over $8 billion worth of precious metals from over 60,000 investors. But of course, most of the gold that comes to us these days usually does get melted down into a variety of different products. Sometimes we do like to leave it in its natural nugget form, so I'm going to quickly talk to you about a couple of very important nuggets to us. The first of them being this one. Now this is obviously not the real nugget, but it is quite a good replica of a nugget that we have called the Welcome Stranger. And the Welcome Stranger was the largest gold nugget to have ever been found on Earth. This was discovered in 1869 in Malayagal, rural Victoria, by two Cornish tin miners called John Deason and Richard Oates. And they were simply digging up an old tree stump in the middle of a field where they came across the top of this. Now, of course, they didn't expect this nugget to be quite as large as it turned out to be, because it took them over 3 hours to get it out of the ground. In that process, breaking 2 pickaxes and finally having to resort to tying a rope to the top of the nugget and having their horse drag it out of the dirt. From there, they took this nugget home and they actually left it on top of their fireplace for about 10 hours. And this was because it was covered in a thick layer of quartz. So when that time had gone by, the quartz had softened up enough for them to chip away at it and get the nugget into the shape that I'm holding now. So they called over their close neighbours and their family, and the next morning brought this one into the bank. And when those bank tellers laid their eyes on this nugget for the first time, they gleefully exclaimed, "We'd love to help you." However, this nugget is too big for our scales. So they next went to the blacksmith, who then cut this nugget down into smaller pieces. Now those pieces were then brought back to the bank, each individually weighed, where it came to a total of 71.5 kilos, which is quite a lot of gold, to say the least. Now, in exchange for this nugget, Deason Oates received about £10,000. Now I know that doesn't really sound like a lot of money, but if we account for inflation and bring it to today's currency, it brings it up to a total of over $14 million. So, Deason Oates happily lived out the rest of their days with their newfound wealth, and their kids got a pretty handy inheritance to boot. But what about WA? Because as Australia's largest state, we naturally have to have a largest nugget. So, this one here is called the Golden Eagle. Now you can see that it does look somewhat like a bird with a beak in the middle here and the wings popping out to the side. Now I have been told that it's got some unofficial names to it as well. Most common one flying around these parts tends to be the giant golden baby. I'd argue that this is probably the most accurate name that we have for this nugget right here. But for today, we'll leave this as the Golden Eagle, and this one was found in 1931 by a 16-year-old boy called Jimmy Larkins. Now, so the story goes. One day, Jimmy went to his dad and said, "Dad, quit my job. How about tomorrow I start helping you go gold prospecting?" And so, that very next day, Jimmy and his dad went out to their plot of land, they dug and they panned, and they found nothing and went back home empty-handed. Now the next day, they went back out to their plot of land, but it was only Jimmy's dad that was digging that day. Jimmy, however, had remembered that they'd gone over quite a large pothole on both trips out. So, he thought he'd take a look inside and see what he could find in it. And what he found was this nugget in that pothole. And obviously quite excited with what he had just discovered. Jimmy yelled out, Dad, look what I found. Look at this slug. Now slug, back in those days, refers to a gold nugget, so they did like to use their code words quite a bit. So as day came over, and between the two of them, they were then able to get the golden eagle out of the ground, where they were then immediately swarmed with all of the other gold prospectors in the area who had heard Jimmy's cries and wanted to come over and see what all the noise was about. Unfortunately for those two, the prospectors were good people. They told that duo to head home straight away and to lay low for the night, so they wouldn't have to deal with the entire town finding out about the nugget and then just causing chaos at their own home. They took on that advice, went straight home, but first thing the next morning, they brought this into the bank, where it weighed in at 35.3 kilos. Now Jimmy and his dad didn't just sell off the nugget straight away. Instead, they decided to take this on tour around the entire state of Western Australia to promote the state's gold industry and then to earn a bit of extra cash on the side as well. Now for me, what makes this tour quite interesting is the levels of security they would have around this nugget. Because when this was on display in public schools and in your local town halls, they would have one police officer standing guard. And that was it. It was just one guy standing there day and night. And when they transport this in between towns, they would simply put this in a box and cover it with a blanket as well. Now hypothetically, if we were to find this nugget in 2025 and we thought to ourselves, you know what, this could be quite fun to take this around the state, I think there'd be armed guards around this on 24/7 to stop anyone from getting too close to it. So for Jimmy and his dad, it was just a bit of a minor miracle. They were able to do that tour without anyone nicking this. But luckily for them, it was still in their possession by the conclusion of said tour, so they were able to bring it back to the bank and cash it in for £5,500. Unlike decent notes, Jimmy and his dad didn't just hold on to the money either. No, I say they invested it very wisely. Other people would say that it is the most Australian thing that you could have done with it because they bought themselves a pub. So what was once called the Terminus Hotel was then renamed to the Golden Eagle Hotel after this very nugget. And that pub stayed open in Boulder until 2012, where it was then, unfortunately, burnt down in a fire. And what was also quite unfortunate about both of these nuggets is that they don't exist anymore. So I already mentioned with the Welcome Stranger that it was chopped up into smaller pieces. It was later melted down. The Golden Eagle was melted down right here at the Perth Mint. And hopefully no one's had a bad accident on the freeway right now. So give this a couple seconds to make sure you can hear everything I say. But the Golden Eagle, that nugget was melted down right here at the Perth Mint, later turned into coins and bars, sold around Australia. Now fortunately, we do still have our own range of gold nuggets inside, as well as a few other very special items as well. So if we're now all following me in, we can have a nice little look at them. So we'll just head back up the ramp and through the green doors and I'll show you in.